guys, just thought I'd take a moment to introduce a new video series before I change my clothes real quick. Um, I went to my office Halloween party dressed as a USO/OSS officer from about 1942. And it's actually kind of an apropos costume for this new set of videos because the subject matter is going to be about fountain pens. And the ballpoint pen wasn't invented until 1952, so everybody during the World War II era used fountain pens or pencils. That was all you had to write with. Um, and believe it or not, there is a massive, massive analog fine writing instrument community today all across the country. Most people think of fountain pens as something esoteric, like someone like I'm representing with this costume would have used back in the day. But there are actually a lot of people across the country who still use fountain pens. I'm not entirely sure when the resurgence occurred, but like I said, if you were learning how to write before 1952, you learned with fountain pens. And of course, the ballpoint eventually pushed fountain pens out of the picture, but I'm not sure they ever completely went out of the picture. I'm sure there were still people who preferred fountain pens to ballpoints. And like I said, I don't know when the resurgence started, but there are brick and mortar and online stores that sell many different kinds of fountain pens. I will leave the links to these places in the description box of this video in case you're interested. And I just thought, some of the people who watch my other videos have probably heard me mention fountain pens. One of the cross-stitch Instagram feeds asked, what's your other hobby besides cross stitch? And I posted a picture of my pen collection. I think there might be a few people out there, hopefully, who are interested in fountain pens, at least interested enough to watch a beginner's fountain pen video, which is what this is going to be. I have some pens in my collection that I personally love and use a lot that I feel would be perfect entry-level fountain pens. And I just thought maybe some of you might be curious because it is a rather esoteric hobby. I don't personally know anyone in my everyday life who uses fountain pens, and I actually know a few people who've been kind of snarky about the fact that I do. But like I said, in the greater fountain pen community at large, I have a lot of friends who I write back and forth with. I'm a journaler and a writer. That's where I get my love of handwriting things down. So I just thought maybe if you're interested, you could let me know what kinds of things you want to learn about. We could talk about nibs, filling systems, different pen brands, ink brands, stationery, notebooks and things. I do have a video planned where I discuss two separate types of traveler's notebook systems, which are just basically leather notebook holders, but that's pretty much all it boils down to. But I plan to do a review of two of those that I have. So I want this to be a video series that is fueled by what you want to learn. I don't have any children of my own. If I did, I would have them using fountain pens. I have tried to get my niece and nephew into them. I'm not sure how much they use the pens that I've given them in the past, but I do have a nice collection that I consider my legacy to them, that I'm going to have it in my will, that I want them to divide up evenly my fountain pens. I don't have any specific pens I would leave to Andrew over Eliza. I just want them to have my pens when I'm gone because I view that as a type of legacy to leave to the next generation. And, I just love fountain pens. This costume today was perfect for me because I have 40s Junction programmed into my XM radio. I have Glenn Miller and Benny Goodman on my iPod, and I write with fountain pens. So who knows? Maybe I lived in a past life back then. And my husband has told me, well, you probably would have been an OSS officer masquerading as a USO performer as a way to get behind enemy lines. And I think he gives me entirely too much credit because if I did live back then and I was an OSS officer, I'd have smarted off to the wrong person and probably been thrown in a concentration camp. And then I probably would have told a Nazi to go screw off, and then I would have gotten killed. So, you know, I think my husband's giving me way too much credit. But I hope you'll enjoy this pin series. I'm going to go change and come back to the year 2017 and get a couple of pins together to show you. And I'll be back in a moment. Okay, well, we're back, folks. And I'm much warmer than I was all day. It figures I'd have a costume like that and then it would be the coldest day of the fall so far. But it was fun. It was fun. That costume was perfect for me. I swear I'm such a throwback. It's like I told someone at work today, I may be the biggest dork that anyone in this office knows, but I'm actually good with that. I listen to swing music. I read a lot of books about World War II. I use fountain pens. Yeah, I'm a dork, but I'm proud of it. Now, 25 years ago, I would have been embarrassed to admit that, but I embrace my inner dork now that I'm older. So, I guess the first question most people have, and some people ask it in a snarky way, and some people are just genuinely curious, is, well, why would you bother with a fountain pen? They're messy, they leak, you get ink all over the place. You don't have to use pens anymore because of our technologically advanced society. So what's the allure? Well, to me, like I've said, I'm a throwback. I like that throwback to a simpler time. But beyond that, I just think better when I handwrite things out. I know there have been, neuroscientific studies that have proven that when you're actually putting words to paper as opposed to typing them on a computer screen, there's actual, pathway connections in your brain that are made that help you retain information more. And I was kind of a dork that way in high school because, I would like scribble out my notes as fast and furious as I could during class. But when I'd get home before I'd start my homework, I'd always recopy my notes. But for some reason, things just stick better that way. I just think better when I handwrite things out, which I hate to think that there's a whole generation of kids coming along now that's never going to know that. It's just fun to write too. I mean, handwriting is going by the wayside as, being taught in school, but there's something beautiful about looking at historical documents and realizing that those were handwritten, like our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence. Those were handwritten, and you look at that and you think, first of all, they're just aesthetically beautiful documents, but, back then you used a feather quill, which was even crazier than the early fountain pens. One of my favorite inventions attributed to Thomas Jefferson was his version of the Xerox machine. He basically rigged a machine where he had a quill. It was like a little framework and there were two quills in it, and the one he used, and as he was writing, the other one made a perfect copy of what he was writing. So he basically invented the Xerox machine for all intents and purposes. And I remember on the very first trip I ever took to Monticello when I was growing up, because I grew up in Richmond, and of course we'd always go to Charlottesville to go to Monticello. I remember that was like the coolest thing ever. I mean, he invented the dumbwaiter and he invented all these agricultural practices and whatnot, but I thought the pseudo Xerox machine was the coolest thing ever. So, I've always been an analog person. I've been a writer since as long as I can remember, honestly. My mother still has some of the poetry and things I wrote in elementary school, and I cringe when I think about that. But, your mom's going to do that. Your mom's going to keep what you write, no matter how cringeworthy it is. And I've just always had stories in my head, but when I was coming along, everything was analog. We didn't get our first computer until I was in 8th grade. And I remember occasionally just sitting down at the computer and typing out a story, but usually I would have handwrite things out. And I'm still the same way. I'm a blogger now, and I have a blog that's just kind of, it's morphed into something bigger than I intended for it to be, because I originally was just going to use it for creative writing, but now I do essays and photo essays and, blog lists and things like that. But even then, I handwrite out everything before I type it up. And I also keep handwritten copies of everything that I put on the blog. And I know that seems incredibly redundant, but I remember when we had our first computer, it had the big, 5.5-inch floppy disks, and it was a monochrome screen and, big thing, big honking thing compared to computers today. But I would save things to the disk, but I wouldn't always print them out. So some of my stories are just lost forever. And, this way I figure at least keeping a handwritten copy of what I write is at least assurance that if the internet apocalypse hits, my writing will still exist somewhere in some form. So, yeah, I don't know. I can't really put into words why I love fountain pens as much as I do, but my grandmother gave me my first one when I was 15. She gave me one that was very much like this. Now, this is not the pen because I lost that pen. But this is a Schaefer Targa that is very, very similar. This has a plastic barrel, and the one she gave me was a matte black metal barrel, because when you posted it, and posting is just a fancy term for putting the cap on the back, it did a little bit of damage to the metal, and there was like a little gold ring around the top of my pen. This is pretty much the same pen. But when I was 15, the summer I was turning 15, she handed me a service merchandise catalog and asked me for some gift ideas because she didn't know what to do. And I didn't really know what to ask for. So, because I don't like to ask for things for my birthday. My mother always says to this day I'm hard to shop for because I don't want to ask. I don't want to ask. It's kind of, I don't know. I would hate to ask for something that somebody couldn't do and then they feel bad because they couldn't give me what I really wanted. So, I was going through the service merchandise catalog and I saw this pen in there. And I thought, that's a really cool pen. And she gave it to me for my birthday. And I carried it all through high school. I carried it all through high school. And then and I took it to college with me too, although at that point it was getting harder to find cartridges in drugstores and office supply stores. But then I lost it somewhere either between moving home from college or moving from home to Memphis when Bill and I got married. And for a while that put me off fountain pens. I did not want to use them because I was heartbroken that I lost the one my grandmother gave me. And for a long time after I got back into using pens, I didn't want this pen. But this pen is different enough from the one she gave me that I don't feel guilty having it in my collection. And that nib, look at that. That is what is called an inlaid nib. As far as I know, Schaefer Targas and maybe Schaefer's and some Auroras might, but let me see if I can get that to focus. Isn't that beautiful? That was my favorite part of the pen when I originally had it. So I got this one at an auction at the DC Pen Show back in 2015. Because this is technically a vintage pen. I mean, vintage has different ways of describing, there's different ways of describing vintage pens, but this one, I think that the pen market in general looks at if it's 25 years or older, and this is a pen from the 80s, so this one's vintage by now. But I thought I would share with you some pens that I have that are really great to start with. I've used them all. I enjoy them all. And even now I would use them. I mean, I might consider them entry-level fountain pens, but a pen doesn't have to be expensive or fancy to write well. So these all fit the bill of writing well, which is, bottom line, the only thing you really need. Now let me pull out my notes. I took some notes on prices and things here so that I can tell you. And like I said, I'm going to put the online pen store information in the description box, so that if you feel froggy and decide you want to try something. Now, by all means, I don't just use fountain pens. I'm just a pen addict. I use gel pens. I've even been known to use ballpoints. I have a gorgeous ballpoint pen I brought home with me from Hawaii last year. It's made out of koa wood and surfboard resin. And koa is a very sacred tree to the native Hawaiians. So they never do anything with it until a tree dies. But when a tree dies, they make all kinds of things out of it. So, you know, I mean, I'm not just exclusively like, I'm not like a fountain pen snob. I use all kinds of pens. It's just fountain pens are my favorite. So, you've decided you want to maybe give it a try. Well, the first pen I would suggest that is very economical is the Pilot Varsity. And you can get these at Jet Pens. Um, I believe you can get these at office supply stores. I know I've seen these at Staples in the past, but I went to my local Staples over the weekend just looking to see if they had any, and they didn't at the time. But I think sometimes you can find these in office supply stores. Now, if you look at this, you would think these are two different pens, but you want to know something funny. There is the Pilot V pen, or there's the Pilot Varsity. They're the exact same stinking pen, but the difference is they don't market it as the Varsity outside of the United States. I'm going to turn a light on behind me to see if it can help show the pens up a bit more, and maybe turn the light off that was in front of me. I have crappy lighting in this apartment, as anyone who's watched my floss tube videos knows. So. And there are plenty of people who do professional fountain pen informational videos. I'm not one of them. This is just something I love that I wanted to share with people who watch my other videos. But anyway, back to this. These are the exact same pen. I guess they just thought the name Varsity didn't translate well for Europe because Americans are obsessed with sports, I guess. Now, these are very nice. These are disposable. Once you use these, you can't do anything else with them. So that's kind of where it's not at all like a traditional fountain pen experience. The nibs are very nice. They come in fine or medium. Let's see if I can, maybe if I turn on, no, that's all the lights I've got. I'm sorry, this is crappy video work. I should probably get an iPhone to do videos on, but I'm not spending that kind of money. But anyway, so they have a very nice nib. They write very smoothly and very well. The only drawback is you can't refill these, so they're disposable. So it's not entirely a fountain pen experience, but they retail for $3 at jetpens.com, or they have a 7-color pack, which includes blue, black, red, green, pink, teal, and purple for $15. If you really like these and you get on a wild hair for these, then you can buy a 7-pack. They write very smoothly. And that's just if you've never written with the nib and you want to just at least try a nib. These pens are great for that. But if you want something that's more of a fountain pen experience, there is a pen that's very similar, and it's a similar price point. I think it's either $2.50 or $3 on Jet Pens, is the Platinum Preppy. And these are actually more like fountain pens because they are cartridge. You can use a cartridge with them, and you can buy refills. The cartridge comes in the barrel like that. And if you look at this, you see the nipple side of the cartridge. That just, I don't think you can actually see it, but you might could. There's a post that runs from the feed. I suppose I should give you a little bit of fountain pen 101 knowledge of terminology here before I start throwing things at you. And you're like, well, that's great, but what's the feed? Wait a minute, this makes no sense to me. The feed is this part here. You can see the black section, the black part that goes down into the nib. That's where the ink flows into. It flows into all these little feed chambers, and that's where the ink comes into the pen. So this part here is the section, the part that the nib goes into, and then of course you've got the body. And when you get into different, more high-end fountain pens, you have different filling systems. But this is a Preppy cartridge. Now, these are proprietary cartridges. I don't know if you can use any cartridges other than Preppy cartridges in a Platinum Preppy. I've never actually gone that far into it. But there is this little rod in the feed, and you just basically snap in. I'm not going to snap this in now for reasons I'll tell you later. But you just basically snap that in there until it clicks. And then what I would recommend when you first put a cartridge in the pen like this is to store it nib down for just a few minutes so that the ink starts flowing down into the feed, and then you can write with it. You're not supposed to store fountain pens long term nib down because they can leak and it just gets a little messy if you do that. I'm not entirely the best about always storing my pens nib up, but you would never want to put a pen nib down in a pocket because then, you know, it might explode. And that's why some people I don't think like the idea of fountain pens, is because they're too messy and fussy and all that. But if you just use proper maintenance and proper pen storage techniques, you won't have problems with it. But the nice thing is, if you don't want to buy cartridges, because these pens are plastic, you can do what is called eyedroppering it. An eyedropper fill is exactly what it sounds like. You can get a pipette and use bottled ink. I have one here in my collection somewhere. And a lot of people who eyedropper pens like the fact that it gives you a massive ink capacity as opposed to that ink cartridge, or for some of my other pens, even a short international cartridge, which is about like that big and hardly holds any ink. This is my favorite eyedropper pen. It is a Franklin Christoph Model 65, and it is in the acrylic. Ooh, okay. Well, see, there is why you should never store your pens nib down, because they will leak. But that's okay. It cleans out. Fountain pens do require some maintenance and cleaning, but it's part of the experience. It's part of the fun for me. I find it therapeutic to just like clean out all my pens and re-ink them, and then I make a little list so I know what ink I've got in what pen, and it's just part of the fun of the experience. But you know, that's why some people don't like fountain pens. But you can see from this pen that it's just the pen barrel. Now I filled this one. Oh, I did a massive cleaning of my pens and refilling during our last home game against UT, so whatever date that was. It was back in September, so it's been about a month. And I have used this pen, but you can still see how much ink I have in it. And it's just nice. I like to ink my pens and not have to constantly be fussing with changing out a cartridge, or, you know, like I'm going to run out of ink mid-sentence if I'm working on a long post that I'm writing or something. So that's the allure of eyedroppering a pen. And I'll actually show you how you do it with one of my other pens here in a minute. But, you know, you just need to put a little teeny bit of silicone grease on the threads on the section, which you can get through Jet Pens and other pen sellers online. And you want to use a very, very small amount, because a little bit goes a long way. But that just creates a waterproof seal around the section so that the ink is not going to leak out of the barrel. And then you just use a pipette and fill it. And this particular ink, I think is, what did I put in this one? I think it's Giarbon Rose Cyclamen. And yeah, I know if you've watched my other videos, you've heard me say how much I hate pink, but maybe I sort of lied about that. I don't like pink, but I bought this ink because my niece loves pink and I wanted pink ink to write her with. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I do have another pink ink that I really like, but for the most part, I don't use pink. All right, so let me see. There's a 0.3 and a 0.2 extra fine nib, and the 0.3 is a fine. So these come in extra fine, fine, and medium. Now, a word of caution if you're not sure about nibs is that Platinum Preppies and Pilots of any kind, Japanese pen brands, the nibs are always smaller than their European counterparts, because I'm assuming they have to be pretty small to write the kanji alphabet. So if you buy a Japanese medium, it would be the equivalent of a Western fine. And if you bought a Japanese fine, it would be the equivalent of a Western extra fine. So, but that's part of the fountain pen experience that I enjoy, is trying nibs and seeing what fits my handwriting. Honestly, I trend more towards broad nibs. If I can find a pen with a broad nib, I prefer a broad nib, because my handwriting is kind of big and swoopy, and you know, I prefer for my handwriting a broad nib. But I have some fine and medium nibs that make my handwriting look really nice too. So that's part of the fun of experimenting with different kinds of pens. So these are also I think they're $2.50 or $3 a piece at Jet Pens, and they have like blue, green, black. They have a blue black ink, which is nice. That's kind of a different color. That's nice. But these would all be fine for work. You know, the blue or the black would be fine for work if you work in a job where you have to sign documents, legal documents and stuff. Those would work fine. But let's say you kind of like the idea of a fountain pen, but you want something that looks a little more like a fountain pen. Honestly, I kind of find some of the stuff that's printed on I kind of find that off-putting. I would just rather have a plain barrel. But you know, that wouldn't stop me from using these pens. It's just aesthetically, that's not the most pleasing fountain pen look. So moving up in the spectrum in price, the next pen I would suggest, I need to find my list here because I put them all in order. Okay, now Jinhao, Jinhao. This is a brand that it's a Chinese brand. You can find them on Amazon. You can also find some Jinhao at Goulet Pens. And it's a pen company that's a scotch controversial because they tend to sometimes make pens that are obvious copies of well-known brands, primarily Mont Blanc. But I hate to say it, but there's a market for it because you're not going to be able to necessarily afford a $1,000 Mont Blanc 149, but you can buy a $8 Chinese Jinhao ripoff. I mean, I probably shouldn't put it that way. That's terrible. But last year, I got my first Jinhao. I never had any intention of owning a Jinhao, but my sister wanted to give me a fountain pen for Christmas, and she told me she had this. It's cool. It's got a dragon. Whoops. Oh, that almost went on the floor. It's got a dragon on the clip. Let me see if I, whoops. Got to get used to showing pens, but she had this wrapped up and on the Christmas tree for me, and she told me after I opened it, she said, well, I wanted to get you a Waterman, but I saw the prices online and hell no. And I'm like, oh my God, you did not need to buy me a Waterman. And she's not someone who uses fountain pens, so she was unaware of what kind of money you can actually spend on a fountain pen. But she found this Jinhao. It's a Jinhao 120 or 1200. And it was on Amazon, and I inked it up immediately because my nephew still had the bottle of ink that I gave him for Christmas a couple of years ago. It writes perfectly. I mean, this pen was probably maybe $5 or $6, but it writes amazingly well. The nib it wrote right out of the box. Nothing funny about the nib, you know, it worked well, it writes smoothly. So you know what, guys? You don't have to spend hardly any money at all to have a nice fountain pen. So I was so impressed with this one, actually, that when I got back from Christmas, now some of them are gaudy. Some of them I will give you are very gaudy. Some of them I wouldn't use. But I went online. I had an Amazon gift card that someone at Christmas gave me. So I thought, you know, maybe I'll see if I can find another Jinhao that I like. And I found this one. It's got the same dragon clip as this one, but it's got a lacquer, well, whatever that Chinese symbol stands for. And then it's got, you can't really see it very well, but it's got a dragon on the barrel. And this one only cost me $7. And this one writes well too. And the nice thing about Jinhao is they're converter pens. You could use a short international cartridge, but there's also Jinhao converters. And like I said, if y'all want to hear, if you wanted me to do a video about filling systems and all, I can do a video showing you different kinds of filling systems and how they work. But, you know, the Jinhao converter, it works well. And these pens, I like having pens that are inexpensive in my collection because I use some inks that are probably not very good for higher end pens. I use a brand called Noodlers that's actually made by a man in Boston. And his are super saturated. I mean, super pigmented. And I wouldn't want to put those in, say, my Visconti because they are kind of thick. They're viscous inks. And I wouldn't want to like mess up the feeds and all in my more expensive pens. But I can use those inks in these pens and that's fine. I mean, if these pens snuff it. Well, it's not that big a deal. This one it would be because my sister gave it to me. But, and I also use inks with glitter in them. And I would never use those kind of inks in my higher end pens because, you know, I wouldn't want to clog the feed with glitter. But it's nice to have some inexpensive pens in your collection that you can use the more esoteric inks for. My favorite Noodler's color, which I heard just recently changed, and I'm hoping when I need a new bottle of it that it'll be close enough that I'll still love it. It's called Noodler's Bay State Concord Grape, and it is a very, very viscous pigmented ink. It is royal purple. I mean, like bright purple. Gorgeous purple. So I hope when they reformulated that ink that they didn't totally change the color, or else I'm going to be upset. So gin howls are nice. You can, you know, they're metal. They're a little bit sturdier. They look fancy, even though they're not. They're not expensive. So if you want to move up from a plastic barrel pen, I would recommend a gin howl, because they write well. And like I said, I mean, some people have problems with them being very controversial for like ripping off higher end pens, but you know, honestly, there has to be a market for it or they wouldn't do it. And like I said, if it came down to spending, I personally would never own a Mont Blanc that wasn't like one of their limited editions. And even with their limited editions, there's only a couple that I like enough that I would consider buying. But just the Mont Blanc 149 Meisterstück, which is masterpiece in German, it's such a plain, for what you spend for a Mont Blanc, it's such a plain pen. It's a black resin pen with a silver clip. I mean, I just don't understand why people love the Mont Blanc. But then again, there's plenty of people who don't understand why you would buy a Visconti, and I have 7 of them. So, you know, it's all a matter of personal taste. So gin howls are nice as well if you want something that's metal and a little bit more substantial than a Preppy or a Varsity. So those are, you know, like between $10 and $12 online, which is not bad. And then the next pens I have in the price spectrum for what I would consider a good entry-level pen is a brand called Cavaco, which is German, and it's K-A-W-E-C-O. Let me see if I can find my Kvitko's. Oh, shoot. Where's my other one? Oh, crap. I left my other one at work because it's in my messenger bag. But I'll tell you about that one anyway. This is the Cavaco Classic Sport. And it is small, but I have small hands. I wear an extra small size glove for handbells. So this size pen is perfect for me. These retail for $20. This is the Classic Sport model. And the only thing, if you really want to have a clip on your pen, is that these don't come with clips. You have to buy the clip separately, and it's like $2 at Jet Pens. So I don't know. I kind of feel like they should give you the clip, but not everybody wants a clip. Some pens don't even come with clips. So I suppose I can understand why they would do that. It's not a make or break thing for me. My other Cavaco is, it's got a black barrel and then it's got music notes on it. It was a Jet Pens limited edition that I bought because I'm a musician. And I don't have a clip on that one. This one I just bought this year. It's a nice little pen. The nib writes very well. I've got broad nibs in both of them. Now, just as a word of caution, because I did this and I felt ridiculous afterwards, if you bought this, you can eyedropper these, but don't forget that they come with the cartridge, because I bought this and I just completely forgot that they come with the cartridge. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm going to eyedropper it. So I'm standing over the sink with my pipette and put a little silicone grease on the threads. And so then, you know, I do the nib down thing for a couple of seconds just to get the ink flow, and tried to write with it and it wouldn't write. And I knew from my other Cavaco pen that I hadn't had a bad experience with that one, and I eyedroppered that one as well. And I was like, well, wait a minute, what's going on? Well, it turned out I left the cartridge in the barrel. It's not going to write if you do that. So just a friendly word of warning. Make sure if you buy a Cavaco that you take the cartridge out. But anyway, so I'm not going to fill this one right now, but you can see the section here. You would put just a teeny tiny little bit of silicone grease on that, just to provide a waterproof barrier for any leakage. And I did have diamine oxblood in this pen, as this pen is burgundy, and oxblood is, I mean, it really does look like dried blood when you clean it up after you use it. So I swear sometimes when I clean out my pens, it looks like a crime scene. Because I love that ink, because I like to use like burgundy inks when I sign Christmas cards for the football team, because our colors are maroon, black, and gray. So, you know, I really like the oxblood ink, but it really does look like blood. So, yeah, I could get myself in trouble using that ink through no fault of my own. So those are nice pens, and it's interesting because Cavaco actually has a lot of different models and price points in their pens. The Classic Sport is the one that I like the best, and it's very affordable. They just came out with one. So let me see if I have my copy of Pen World magazine around here. They just came out with one. It's actually less expensive. That is considered an entry-level pen. It's called the Preppy. It retails for $15. So I like the idea of a basic entry-level. Let me see if I can find it. It was in the latest. And yes, there is a magazine dedicated to fountain pens. And by the way, the cover fountain pens here, if money were no object, I would have the Imperial Russian, because the 1613 one is from when the Romanovs took the throne, and then of course the 1917, obviously the October Revolution. But as much as I'm fascinated with all things Russian, if money were no object, which of course it is, but if money were no object, I would own that one. But, you know, a lot of people say, well, how can you justify spending money on pens? Well, how can you justify spending money on anything you collect? You know, some people spend it on handbags. Some people spend it on shoes. Some people restore old cars, you know. I mean, how can you justify any money you're going to spend on any hobby? But I would never buy a pen I wouldn't use. That's my justification. If I'm spending a certain amount of money on a pen, I'm gonna use it. I'm not gonna ever buy a pen that I'd be nervous to use. But anyway, back to talking about Cavaco. Oh, here it is. The only reason I don't have one of these is because I don't like the colors. But this, I don't know if you can see this, but this is the ad for the Cavaco Preppy, which is a $15 pen. And they have a 16 faceted barrel. They're small like the one I have, but there's that yellowish green and black one, and then there's the peachy pink and black one. I just don't like the colors of these pens, but that is their most basic pen, which is $15, and then the Classic Sport, which I showed you, is $20. And then it goes up from there. They have some metal pens. They have a brass Cavaco Sport, which is the same shape and style of the one I have in brass. And I believe they have aluminum versions of it as well, which I think retail for about $80. And then they have an absolutely gorgeous, but I would never spend money on it because it would seem like such a waste, amazing line of carbon fiber pens. But if I'm buying a carbon fiber pen and spending the kind of money you would for that, I'm not buying a pen that small. I probably wouldn't even necessarily buy a pen unless it was oversized, just because of what you pay for a carbon fiber pen. They have an amazing Cavaco carbon fiber that's red and black, but it's $125. There's no way I'm spending that on that kind of pen. Just not, and just totally not. If I bought a carbon fiber pen, I think I'd probably buy a Vanishing Point, a Pilot Vanishing Point, because the carbon fiber versions of those pens are amazing. So the Cavaco is, but the carbon fiber is a pen exactly like this in shape and size. It's just got carbon fiber in it, and then it's got red accents as opposed to a solid color. So a pen like that, carbon fiber, not worth it. At least in my humble opinion. Your mileage may vary. Oh, and while I'm at it, I know I've been mentioning short international cartridges. That is the size of a short international cartridge. So you can see why some people with eyedropper pens if given the choice, because that's, for me, at best, that's like a page worth of writing. So I don't use a lot of cartridge pens, but I have a couple. I have a couple that only use cartridges, and that's fine, but I just prefer more ink capacity. So the next group of pens I also have is another German brand called Lamby. And these retail, I'll show you the two body styles that I have. Well, there's the two body styles, and then there's a couple of other models, so to speak, in the lineup. The Lamby Safari has a plastic body, and this was the pen that got me back into fountain pens. After I lost the pen that my grandmother gave me, I really was put off pens, like I said before. And then when I moved to Massachusetts from Memphis, I live in Western Mass. So yeah, no, driving to Logan ain't going to happen when I want to fly home. So where I fly home from Hartford, Connecticut to Philly, and then Philly to Richmond. And there used to be years ago a pen store between the C and D concourse. And as many times as I got stuck in the airport or just stranded in Philly, I frequented that shop a couple times. But back then I didn't know about back then the online pen community was really in its infancy, and I didn't know where you would find ink. I didn't know anything about anything online, and I think the pen retailers I shop with online today weren't even in existence back then. So I was reluctant to get back into it, because why buy pens if you can't find the ink? But in 2009, I think it was, I first listened to the Pen Addict podcast, which is Brad Dowdy's podcast. You can Google it, and it's, oh, I think I got trick-or-treaters next door. I came home and our neighbors had put a chair with a bowl of candy out in front of the door, because I guess they just don't want to be bothered to open the door for every kid that comes by. But truthfully, in an apartment like this, you don't get a lot of trick-or-treaters anyway. It's mostly college kids who are going out to Halloween parties and getting drunk, I'm sure. So anyway, where was I? So in 2009, I learned about jet pens through the Pen Addict podcast. And I went there and just started looking. And I was just curious. And I put fountain pens in. And they do carry a wide variety of fountain pens. And this was the pen that I found. It's a Lamby Safari, plastic black barrel. This one, the Safari retails for $30. And I put it on my wish list and sent my wish list to my mom, and she gave this to me for Christmas. And then in January of 2010, I bought my first bottle of ink because this pen had a converter, and it was all downhill from there. Since then, I've been an avid collector. So the Safari is the plastic barrel. It retails for $30. Now, I don't know how well this is going to show up on this jinky webcam. Well, I think it's my lighting, not my webcam. But it actually has a triangular shaped grip. Some people don't give it a second thought. I'm one of them. It helps me have a correct, have the correct angle on the nib when I write. Other people don't like the triangular grip because it doesn't fit their particular way of holding a pen. To me, it doesn't matter. It can be a little off-putting, I guess, to some people, but I'm not that picky about my pens, folks. I mean, I hear some people go batcrap crazy about how awful a pen is, and maybe I have one like it, and I'm like, well, mine's fine. I'm easy to please, I think, is what it is. So then there is also the Lamby Alstar for the aluminum pen. And it's the exact same thing as the Safari. It's just aluminum. And these pens come in a wide variety of colors. I mean, you could you could pretty much just collect Lammies if you wanted to. The Alstars are $36. And this one has a clear section, and it still has that same triangular grip. I really like these pens. I mean, they're workhorses. The nibs actually come fine, medium, broad, 1.1, 1.5, and 1.9 millimeter stub, and they're interchangeable. Basically, all you have to do is take a piece of Scotch tape and stick it to the nib and pull it off, and then just put another nib on there. You can see this is a stub nib on this one because it's got the straight, it's straight across the top. This one is the 1.5 millimeter stub. I love to use this with my sparkle inks because it just makes them shine. I'll probably use this pen with one of my sparkle inks for Christmas cards. I do have a green and a Christmas red one. I've got, I think it's, I can't remember the name of the red, but it's a forest green that has silver sparkles in it. So this would probably be my Christmas card signing pen. But that's the stub nib, and then I have a broad one, and then I think this one is the medium nib. And you can see how it's got a little bit of ink in the nib there. That's called nib creep, and it's basically just, you know, because fountain pens you use air to they use air to operate, so sometimes you just get a little bit of ink seepage out through the nib slit. And see the hole there, I don't know if you can see it, but the hole in the nib there is called a breather hole. And most modern pens have breather holes. It's just part of the mechanism that makes the ink flow. You have to have air intake into a fountain pen for the ink to flow because it's all capillary action through the feed. Listen to me sounding like I know something about science. I don't really. I just know about fountain pens. Now, the one thing that really pissed me off about the last time I went to the Long Island Pen Show in 2016 was I went and I had my pens, and there was a Schaefer Targa dealer there, and I was showing him because I had my Targa with me, and I was showing him the one I had, and he looked at my pen collection, and I have 4 Lammies. I have 2 Safaris and 2 Alstars, and this guy looked at me and he's like, "Oh, well, you like your Lammies, don't you?" I was like, dude, just shut up. You know, I can't stand the kind of pen snobbery that exists among some people about, you know, certain brands. Yeah, okay. Is this the single most expensive fountain pen you could own? No, not by a long shot. But, I mean, and you know, if he's there the next time I go, I didn't get to go this year because the date changed and I couldn't make it. But if I went back next year and I saw him, I would not buy a Schaefer from him. I would seek out another vintage pen dealer because to me, that's just the height of snobbery. You know, I mean, Schaefer Targas are probably maybe, back in the day, they maybe retailed for like $110, $125. They're probably go for more now just because, you know, they're vintage and you can put the vintage label on them and charge more for them. But I don't think I would buy a pen from him, even though I love Schaefers. I have 2 Schaefers. I have a Targa and a Tyrannus, and I would love to expand my Schaefer collection a little bit just because they're amazing, amazing pens. But I don't think I'd buy from him because he was just such a snob about it. And yes, I do like my Lammies. They write very well, and there's no reason to be a snob about it, you know. As long as the nib works, who cares what kind of pen you're using? You could have a collection of nothing but Preppies, and that's fine. So, yeah, the Lammies that was a bone of contention with me. And I also had somebody tell me at the very first pen show that I attended, I was looking at some vintage, what was I looking at? Vintage 1940 eras, 1940s. What was I looking at? It was a vintage 1940s era. It wasn't a Wall. I can't remember. Oh, what brand is this? It was like one of these. Oh, a Parker. a Parker Vacuumatic. I was looking at a vintage Parker Vacuumatic that I think was from like 1939 or 1940. And the guy looked at me and I said, "Oh, that's a really beautiful pen." And I said, "There's no tag on it." And he said, "Well, you couldn't afford that." And I was like, "Really? I couldn't afford it." Okay, well, I can, but I'm not going to. So I walked right past that table. Some people in the pen world are such freaking snobs. I don't happen to be. I just want to be someone who loves pens and uses them. And here's another Lamby, actually. I'll show you this. This is not one I would recommend for a beginner, but this is the Lamby Joy calligraphy set. I'm not really sure why, because I don't even know why this pen is necessary. This one retails for $36 too, I think. I don't know why this pen is necessary because you can exchange the nibs. And I mean, true calligraphy nibs are like, this one is the 1.9 that I was telling you about. That one like sucks ink like you wouldn't believe. I have my Diatramentus Mahatma Gandhi in there now, which looks amazing in this pen, but I'm really not sure why they have to have the Lamby Joy if you can use the calligraphy nibs in your regular Lambys. And Mahatma Gandhi is a saffron yellow. It's like a bright saffron yellow that dries to like an orangey yellow. It's one of my favorite inks, and it's one of my favorite inks to use with a big calligraphy nib like that. But to me, I don't know. I don't know that the Lamby Joy is really necessary because you can buy the calligraphy nibs and use them and swap them out in your other pens. So that was just one that I had that I just bought on a whim because, well, I don't know why I did. Honestly, I don't think I would buy that pen if I was going to buy it today, just because it's kind of redundant. All right, so I'm just running my trap, folks. Let's see, where is my other Twizz Bee? All right, so we've talked enough about German pens. Let's move on to a South Korean pen. Now, these are called Twizz Bees. TWISBI. I really love all my pens, so it's hard for me to say which are my favorites. But I use these more on a day-to-day basis probably than any other pen in my collection. These two models are very economical. And in fact, economical is what this first pen is about. This is the Twizz Bee Eco. And I thought it was eco, like ecological or environmental, something like that. But it's actually, it stands for economical. This is a $30 pen. And the intriguing thing about Twizz Bee is that this is the only brand of entry-level pens that has a piston filler. Now, and doesn't use a converter or a cartridge. I don't know how well this shows up. I'm trying to see if I can get out of the light glare there. But you see this rod here? This is the piston. Now it's full of ink, so I'm not, I can't actually show you how it works. But maybe what I'll do, if you want to see a video about filling systems, I can clean out some of my pens and just show you how they work without any ink in them. But what you do is when you're going to fill this, you twist this cap up here counterclockwise and it pushes the piston down. So obviously I can't do that now or sploosh ink all over the place. So it brings the piston down, and then you submerge the nib in the ink bottle, put the nib all the way in the ink, and then you turn the piston clockwise, and it draws the ink up as the piston moves up. It creates like a little vacuum in there, and as you move the pen up, as you move the piston up, the ink draws up. Piston fillers are usually found in more expensive pens. So this is really a feather in Twizz Bee's cap that they can offer a filling system like that gives you more ink capacity at a $30 price point. Or wait a minute, was it $30? Let me just make sure before yeah, the Eco is the $30 price point. So you're not going to find this filling system on a pen this affordable other than the Twizz Bee. And I like it because it holds a lot of ink. I would say my favorite filling systems are pneumatic fillers, but those are more on like vintage pens and some modern pens. But the piston filler allows you to simply draw the piston down, put your pen in the ink, go back clockwise, bring the piston up, and it holds. You can see there, I filled this one at the same time I filled my other one. And I haven't used this one quite as much, but it does hold a lot of ink. It holds about that much ink, which is probably twice what you would get out of a cartridge or a converter. These come in fine, broad, and medium. And I like the fact that they decided to make a less expensive pen with, you know, a economical consumer in mind, because, you know, not everybody wants to spend exorbitant amounts on a pen. And it's a great writer. I use this quite a bit. There's also a version of it that has a white top, and it has the Twizz Bee logo on the end cap. It's a good little pen, writes well. That's all that matters, right? Okay, now this one is this one was a special edition of the Diamond 580. It's an American one. It's got red and blue on the body, and then it's got an American flag on the top, because you know me, America. What can I say? So when I saw this pen, I decided I was going to get the special edition one. This is a model called the Diamond 580, which is the current iteration of the previous pen called the Diamond 540. Now, if you're doing any research into this pen, you might see some complaints that this pen was prone to breaking, cracking, like on the cap or the barrel. That was the 540. And I think one of the best things about the Twizz Bee brand is that they really take their customer service and their customer issues seriously. So when they started getting a lot of reports that the 540 was kind of inferior and cracked a lot, they scrapped that one. You can't even get a 540 anymore, as far as I know. And they created the 580 to address the quality control issues. And I think that nowadays this pen is perfectly good. If I had bought the original 540, I might not say that, but this pen is a perfectly good pen. It's also a piston filler, so there again you can see the piston and you can see how much ink it holds. You can see in this one, because this is the Noodler's Ottomans Rose Pink that I was telling you about, you can see there how much ink I've used. This is kind of like a mauve-y rose colored ink. It's not like in your face bubblegum pink, which is really the pink I can't stand. And it's got I've got a broad nib on this one. This is actually the pen I was using to write in my journal the other day. This one retails for, I believe, let me check, but $50. And it's a sturdy pen. Now the interesting thing, when you buy a Twizz Bee, they'll send you silicone grease and a little plastic wrench, because technically you can completely dismantle this pen. Totally pointless to do so, if you ask me. When I do clean this pen out, I take the nib out. You can unscrew the nib from the section, and I take the nib out and clean the feed and the nib separately from the body of the pen. But you could technically, the wrench is to undo the piston here and take the piston out, but there's no need for that, because if there was truly a need to disassemble a pen to clean it, every single pen model out there from beginner all the way up would be disassemblable. You'd have to disassemble it, and I think I just made up a new word. But the Twizz Bee is the only pen that you get with the tool to take it completely apart. So obviously it's not a requirement to clean a pen to disassemble it. And I've never disassembled my pen because, first of all, I don't need to. And second of all, I'm afraid that if I tried to force it back together or something, I'd crack something and make it useless. And this is a great pen and I don't want to break it. Some people do take their pens apart, their Twizz Bees apart, but I'm not one of them. It's just not necessary, because if it was, then every single pen you ever bought beyond just a cartridge converter pen, you'd have to take apart, and trust me, you don't. So the Twizz Bees are very nice. I love mine. They write very, very well. And then the last pen that I would consider for an entry-level pen, it's a $56 one. It's the most expensive of the least expensive pens, if that makes sense, is this Pilot Prera. Now, Pilot is an amazing brand. I have a couple of higher-end Pilot vanishing points that I can show you at some point if you're interested. But as far as an entry-level pen, this is killer. it is such a good pen. Now this one, some people complain because I don't know if you can see it. Let me show you the other side here. But there's like a white film on the inside of the cap that keeps you from being able to see the nib. Some people gripe and complain about that. To me, it's not a deal breaker. Like I said, I'm easy to please as long as the pen writes. This one is a converter pen. It has a nice feel to it. It's a plastic pen, but it has enough metal on it to make it a nice feel in your hand. It doesn't feel inexpensive, and quite frankly, at $56, it's not. It's a converter pen that happens to be a demonstrator. I like that you can see the ink. The only issue I have is that it just does not hold much ink at all. If I had to complain about this pen, it would be that the converter is small enough that I just constantly have to refill it. Which reminds me, I need to fill it because I haven't used it in a while. My favorite ink to use in this one is Diamine Regency Blue. It's a very, very saturated, like almost navy blue. And I was never really into blue inks until recently, because I kind of thought blue was sort of ordinary and common, and if I want to use blue ink, I'll use a gel pen or a ballpoint. But there are so many beautiful blue inks out there of all shades. I like the ones that trend more towards purple, but Regency Blue is this gorgeous, gorgeous navy blue. And I've got a stub nib in this one, which it writes very, very smoothly. Some stub nibs can be a bit scratchy. And I think that's really the difference between a stub and an italic nib. They're essentially the same type thing. They're cut on an angle and they give you more of a calligraphy look to your handwriting. But I think, and I can't remember which way it goes, either it's an italic is scratchier than a stub nib because the edges are straight across the nib. And I know there's a difference. And I know there's a heck of a lot more people who can explain it better than me, but one has rounded off edges and one doesn't. So I think the italic is scratchier than the stub nib, but this pen writes beautifully. My only knock against it is it doesn't hold that much ink, but shucky darn, I'll just have to refill it. I can maybe get a page written before I have to refill it. Now the cool thing about this particular converter, and it's, as far as I know, it's only part of the, but can you hear that? It's got a little agitator ball in the converter so that the ink doesn't clump up. I mean, that's just Japanese ingenuity for you right there. I mean, I just love that little ball bearing in there. It's not necessary, I don't think, but it's just kind of something that sets this pen apart. You can get these at Jet Pens, and they have all kinds of colors. They have a black, or they have one with a black ink cap, one with purple, one with a green, and they're just really nice little pens. And like I said, I mean, I would never not buy a pen just because it's got a sleeve in the cap or it's got, you know, small ink capacity. I think it's all personal preference and what you find that fits your hand and, you know, your writing experience. Like with my Viscontis, I've never had a bad Visconti. I guess maybe I'm lucky because a lot of people who've had Viscontis say the nibs don't work well, and for the price you pay for a Visconti, it should work right out of the box, which I totally agree with. But at the same time, I've never had problems with mine, so I can't speak to that. But you know, the fountain pen world is a fun world to play around in. You can go down the rabbit hole, you can start a collection, you can, you know, just have one or two. You can have more ink than you do pens, more pens than you do ink. It's just a fun way to stay connected to the past, and it's a fun way to stay connected to my personal past when I was handwriting everything down. It's something that I love, and I always have. And just to show you one final pen that would have been used by someone like my alter ego in the beginning of the video, this is a vintage Esterbrook lever filler from late 30s, early 40s. It was an Esterbrook J. J model, and it's a lever filler. I don't know how well the lever shows up, but see that little piece of metal? I'm not going to lift it up because it's got ink in it, but you lift, what you do is you put the nib, you lift this lever out, put the nib in the ink, and then let the lever go. And as the lever comes back up, it compresses a sac in the pen. Why am I showing? You would think I'd never made a video off this stupid webcam. Good Lord, I keep forgetting you got to go the other way. Well, let me do that again. This little piece of metal here, you pull it out, you put your nib in the ink, and then you let this lever go, and it compresses a sac in the pen that then as air comes back up into it, it sucks ink up into the pen. And these were a dime a dozen back in the day. There's the nib. It's very, very fine. It's a hard nib to write with. You have to, I mean, it's like almost a needlepoint nib. I mean, I could cross stitch with this nib probably, but it's one of the harder nibs I have to write with, but I just have to go write slower, which is kind of nice. You know, I don't have to be in a rush. But yeah, these pens were all over the place in the 30s and 40s. I mean, this is what you wrote with back in the day when I would have been the USO officer. It's such a pretty little pen. And you can actually find these restored versions of these all over the place because they were so commonplace. It's easier to find these particular pens in the vintage market than it is some of the others. Like I would love a Parker Duofold, but ain't gonna happen because they're rare, and if you can find one that writes, they're very expensive because they're hard to refurbish. They're just harder to get back into pristine writing condition than some vintage pens. But I mean, I hope this has been an interesting video. I hope this is something that you might consider if you're interested, or might just think, hey, it was an interesting video, I'm glad I watched. Fountain pens are for me, but it's certainly an interesting world. And whatever reason brought you here, I hope you enjoyed it. I've been talking for over an hour, so I should probably sign off now. I could talk blue streak about pens just like I could about cross stitch. And it's funny because most of the people I know, if you try to, their eyes glaze over and they try real hard to act like they're interested, even though they're not. But please let me know that. Oh, and I forgot. Oh my goodness. Almost forgot this. Well, I'm going to do a giveaway. I'm going to give away to 4 people my Preppies and my Varsity and my V-Pen. So if you just leave a comment between now and today is the 31st. So let's see. It's the 31st. I'll let it run for 2 weeks. That's today is Tuesday, right? So next Tuesday is the 7th, right? Yeah, the 8th. Well, let's just say I'll have it go to November 14th. But just leave a comment. Let me know. Did you like the series? Are you interested in fountain pens? Are they too fussy for you? You know, what's your thought on this whole fountain pen thing? Was it interesting? Was it boring? Do you want me to still do some other fountain pen videos, some stationery videos? Is this the kind of thing you want to see as a little bit of a regular video post on my YouTube channel? Just let me know. Let me know what you think. And by your leaving a comment, you'll be entered into the drawing, and I will give away on the 14th. I will use a random number generator to pick the winners. And then I will just bubble wrap your pen and stick it in the mail to you. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I didn't ramble too long. Happy early Fountain Pen Day. Fountain Pen Day is the first Friday of November, so that's coming up this Friday on the 3rd. So I don't know what else to say, so I'm going to sign off here. Hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, see you around the internet.